The last word came as a hiss, and a snarl of the golden doors of the locket swung wide with a thick click. Behind both the glass windows within blinked a living eye, dark and handsome as Tom Riddle's eyes had been before he turned them scarlet and slit-pupilled. "Stab!" said Harry, holding the locket steady on the rock. Ron raised the sword in his shaking hands. The point dangled over the frantically swiveling eyes, and Harry gripped the locket tightly, bracing himself, already imagining blood pouring from the empty windows. Then a voice hissed from out of the Horcrux. "I've seen your heart, and it is mine." "Don't listen to it," Harry said harshly. "Stab it!" "I've seen your dreams, Ron Weasley, and I have seen your fears. All you desire is possible, but all that you dread is also possible." "Stab!" shouted Harry. His voice echoed off the surrounding trees. The sword point trembled, and Ron gazed down into Riddle's eyes. "Least loved always by the mother who craved a daughter. Least loved now by the girl who prefers your friend. Second best always, internally overshadowed." "Ron! Stab it now!" Harry bellowed. He could feel the locket quivering in his grip, and was scared of what was coming. Ron raised his sword still higher, and as he did so, Riddle's eyes gleamed scarlet. Out of the locket's two windows, out of the eyes, there bloomed two grotesque bubbles, the heads of Hermione and Harry, weirdly distorted. Ron yelled in shock, backed away from the figures blossoming out of the locket, first chest, then waist, then legs, until they stood inside the locket, side by side, like trees with a common root, swaying over Ron and the real Harry, who had snatched his fingers away from the locket as it burned suddenly white hot. "Ron!" he shouted. But the Riddle Harry was now speaking with Voldemort's voice, and Ron was gazing, memorized, into its face. "Why return? We were better without you, happier without you, glad of your absence. We laughed at your stupidity, your cowardice, your presumption." "Presumption!" echoed the Riddle Hermione, who stood more beautiful and yet more terrible than the real Hermione. She swayed, crackling before Ron, who looked horrified yet transfixed, the sword hanging pointlessly at his side. "Who could look at you? Who would ever look at you beside Harry Potter? What have you done compared to the chosen one? What are you compared with the boy who lived?" "Ron! Stab it! Stab it!" Harry yelled, but Ron did not move. His eyes were wide, and the Riddle Harry and the Riddle Hermione were reflected in them, their hair swinging like flames, their eyes shining red, their voices lifted in the evil duet. "Your mother confessed," sneered Riddle Harry, while Riddle Hermione jeered, "that she would have preferred me as a son, would be glad to exchange." "Who wouldn't prefer him? What woman would take you? You are nothing, nothing, nothing compared to him," crooned Riddle Hermione, and she stretched like a snake, entwined herself around Riddle Harry, wrapping him in a close embrace. Their lips met. I'm sorry, guys. On the ground in front of them, Ron's face filled with anguish. He raised the sword high, his arms shaking. "Do it, Ron!" yelled Harry. Ron looked towards him, and Harry thought he saw a trace of scarlet in his eyes. "Ron!" The sword flashed, plunged. Harry threw himself out of the way. There was a clang of metal and a long drawn-out scream. Harry whirled around, slipping in the snow, wand held ready to defend himself, but there was nothing to fight. The monstrous versions of himself and Hermione were gone. There was only Ron, standing there with a sword held shakily in his hands, looking down at the shattered remains of the locket on the flat rock. Slowly, Hermione walked back to him, hardly knowing what to say or do. Ron was breathing heavily. His eyes were no longer red at all, but their normal blue. They were also wet. Harry stooped, pretended he had not seen, and picked up the broken Horcrux. Harry had pierced the glass in both windows. Riddle's eyes were gone, and the stained silk lining of the locket smoked slightly. The thing that had lived in the Horcrux had vanished. Torturing Ron had been its final act. The sword clanged as Ron dropped it. He had sunk to his knees, his head in his arms. He was shaking. But not, Harry realized, from the cold. Harry crammed the broken locket into his pocket, knelt down beside Ron, and placed a hand cautiously on his shoulder. He took it as a sign that Ron did not throw it off. "After you left," he said in a low voice, grateful for the fact that Ron's face was hidden, "she cried for a week. Probably longer. Only she didn't want me to see. There were loads of nights when we never even spoke to each other, with you gone." He could not finish. It was only now that Ron was here again that Harry finally realized how much his absence had cost them. "She's like a sister," he went on. "I love her like a sister, and I reckon she feels the same way about me. It's always been like that. I thought you knew." Ron did not respond, but turned his face away from Harry and wiped his nosily on his sleeve. Harry got to his feet again and walked to where Ron's enormous rucksack lay yards away, discarded as Ron had run towards the pool to save Harry from drowning. He had hoisted it onto his own back and walked back to Ron, who clambered to his feet as Harry approached, his blood shot, but otherwise composed. "I'm sorry," he said in a thick voice. "I'm sorry I left. I know I was, He looked around in the darkness, as hoping a bad enough word would swoop down upon him and claim him. "You sort of made up for it tonight." Oh, gosh. Sorry, guys. "You sort of made up for it tonight," said Harry, getting the sword, finishing off the Horcrux, saving my life. "That makes me sound a lot cooler than I was," Ron mumbled. "Stuff like that always sounds cooler than it really was," says Harry. "I've been trying to tell you guys that for years." Simultaneously, they walked forward and hugged. Harry gripped the still sopping back of Ron's jacket. "And now," said Harry as they broke apart, "all we got to do is find the tent again." But it was not difficult. Though the walk through the dark forest with the doe had seemed lengthy, with Ron by his side, the journey back seemed to take surprisingly short time. Harry could not wait to wake up Hermione, and it was with a quickening excitement that he entered the tent, Ron lagging a little behind him. It was gloriously warm after the pool and the forest. The only illumination, the bluebell flames, was still shimmering in the bowl of the floor. Hermione was fast asleep, curling up under her blankets, and did not move until Harry had said her name several times. "Hermione!" She stirred, then sat up quickly, pushing her hair out of her face. "What's wrong, Harry? Are you all right?" "I'm okay. Everything's fine. More than fine. I'm great." "There's someone here." "What do you mean? Who?" She saw Ron, who stood there holding the sword, and dripping onto the threadbare carpet. Harry backed into the shadowy corner, slipped off Ron's rucksack, and attempted to blend in with the canvas. Hermione slid out of her bunk and moved like a sleepwalker towards Ron, her eyes upon his pale face. She stopped right in front of him, her lips slightly parted, her eyes wide. Ron gave a weak, hopeful smile and raised his arms. Hermione launched herself forward, started punching every inch of him that she could reach. "Ouch! Ooh, gruff! What the? Hermione! Ow!" "You complete farce! Ronald Weasley! She punctuated every word with a blow. Ron backed away, shielding his head as Hermione advanced. You crawl back here after weeks and weeks. Oh, where's my wand? She looked as though ready to wrestle it out of Harry's hands, and he reacted instinctively. Protego! The invisible shield erupted between Ron and Hermione. The force of it knocked her backwards onto the floor. Spitting her hair out of her mouth, she leapt up again. Hermione, said Harry. Calm. I will not calm down, she screamed. Never before had he seen her lose control like this. She looked quite demented. Give me back my wand. Give it back to me. Hermione, will you please? Don't you tell me what to do, Harry Potter, she screeched. Don't you dare. Give it back to me now. And you! I'm sorry. She was pointing at Ron in dire accusation. It was like a malediction. And Harry could not blame Ron for retreating several steps. I came running after you. I called you. I begged you to come back. I know, said Ron. Hermione, I'm sorry. I'm really... Oh, you're sorry. She laughed, high-pitched, out-of-control sound. Ron looked at Harry for help, but Harry merely grimaced in helplessness. You come back after weeks, and you think it's all going to be all right if you just... Sorry? Well, what else can I say? Said Ron shouted, and Harry was glad that Ron was fighting back. Oh, I'll tell you, yelled Hermione with awful sarcasm. Rack your brains, Ron. That should only take a couple of seconds. Hermione, interjected Harry, who considered this a low blow. He just saved my... I don't care, she screamed. I don't care what he's done. Weeks and weeks. We could have been dead for all he knew. I knew you weren't dead, bellowed Ron, drowning her voice for the first time, and approaching as close as he could with the shield charm between them. Harry's all over the Prophet, all over the radio. They're looking for you everywhere. All those rumors and mental stories. I knew I'd hear straight off if you were dead. You don't know what it's been like. What it's been like for you? Her voice was now so shrill only bats were able to hear it soon. But she had reached a level of indignation that rendered her temporarily speechless, and Ron seized the opportunity. I wanted to come back the minute I disapparated, but I walked straight into a gang of snatchers, Hermione, and I couldn't go anywhere. A gang of what? Asked Harry, as Hermione threw herself down into a chair with her arms and legs crossed so tightly it seemed unlikely that she could have unraveled them for several years. Snatchers, said Ron. They're everywhere. Gangs trying to earn gold by rounding up Muggleborns and blood traders. There's a reward for the Ministry for everyone captured. I was on my own, and I looked like I might be school-age, so they got really excited. Thought I was a Muggleborn in hiding. I had to talk fast to get out of being dragged into the Ministry. What did you say to them? I told them I was Stan Shunpike, first person I could think of. And they believed you? They weren't the brightest. One of them definitely was part troll. The smell of him. Whew. Ron glanced at Hermione, clearly hopeful she might soften at this small instance of humor, but her expression remained stony above her tightly knotted limbs. Anyways, they had to row about whether I was Stan or not. It was a bit pathetic, to be honest, but there were still 5 of them and only 1 of me, and they'd taken my wand. Then 2 of them got into a fight, and while the others were distracted, I managed to hit the one holding me in the stomach, grabbed his wand, and disarmed the bloke holding mine, and disapparated. I didn't do it so well. Splinched myself again. Ron held up his right hand to show 2 missing fingernails. Hermione raised her eyebrows coolly. and I came out miles from where you were. By the time I got back to the bit of the riverbank where we'd been, you'd gone. Gosh, what a gripping story, Hermione, Hermione said, in a lofty voice she adopted when she's wishing to wound. You must have been simply terrified. Meanwhile, we went back to Godric's Hollow. Let's think what happened there, Harry. Oh, yes. You know whose snake turned up? It nearly killed both of us. And then, you know who himself arrived and missed us by a second. What? Ron said, gaping from her to Harry, but Hermione ignored him. Imagine losing fingernails, Harry. That really puts our sufferings into perspective, didn't it? Hermione, said Harry quietly, Ron just saved my life. She appeared not to have heard him. One thing I would like to know, though, she said, fixing her eyes on the spot of foot over Ron's head. How exactly did you find us tonight? That's important. Once we know, we'll be able to make sure we're not visited by anyone else we didn't want to see. Ron glared at her, then pulled a small silver object from his jean pocket. This. He had to look at Ron to see what he was showing them. The Deluminator, she asked. She's so surprised she forgot to look cold and fierce. It doesn't just turn the lights on and off, said Ron. I don't know how it works or why it happened then and not the other time, because I've been wanting to come back ever since I left. But I was listening to the radio really early on Christmas morning, and I heard you. He was looking at Hermione. You heard me on the radio? She asked incredulously. No, I heard you coming out of my pocket, your voice. He held up the Deluminator again. Came out of this. And what exactly did I say? Asked Hermione, her tones somewhere between skepticism and curiosity. My name, Ron. And you said something about a wand? Hermione turned a fiery shade of scarlet. Harry remembered. It had been the first time Ron's name had been said aloud by either of them since the day he'd left. Hermione had mentioned it when talking about repairing Harry's wand. So I took it out, Ron went on, looked at the Deluminator, and it didn't seem different or anything. But I was sure I'd heard you, so I clicked it, and the light went out in my room, but another light appeared right outside the window. Ron raised his empty hand and pointed it in front of him, his eyes focused on something neither Harry nor Hermione could see. It was a ball of light, kind of pulsing and bluish, like the light you get around a portkey, you know? Yeah, said Harry and Hermione together automatically. I knew this was it, said Ron. I grabbed my stuff, packed it, and I put on my rucksack and went out into the garden. The little ball of light was hovering there, waiting for me, and when I came out, it bobbled along a bit, and I followed behind it behind the shed, and then, well, it went inside me. Sorry? Said Harry, sure he had not heard him correctly. It sort of floated towards me, said Ron, illuminating the movement with his free index finger, right to my chest, and then it just went straight through. I was here. He touched a point close to his heart. Oh, it was here. I could feel it. It was hot, and it was inside me. I knew what I was supposed to do. I knew it would take me where I needed to go. So I disapparated and came out to the side of a hill. There was snow everywhere. We were there, said Harry. We spent 2 nights there, and the second night I kept thinking I could hear someone moving around in the dark, calling out. Yeah, well, that would have been me, said Ron. Your protective spells work anyways, because I couldn't see you, and I couldn't hear you, and I was sure you were around, though. So in the end, I got it in my sleeping bag and waited for one of you to appear. I thought you'd have to show yourselves when you packed up the tent. No, actually, said Hermione. We disapparated under the invisibility cloak as an extra precaution. and left really early because, as Harry says, we heard somebody blundering around. Well, I stayed on that hill all day, said Ron. I kept hoping you'd appear, but when it started to get dark, I knew I must have missed you guys. So I clicked the deluminator again, and the blue light came out and went inside me, and I disapparated and arrived here in the woods. I still couldn't see you, so I had hoped one of you would show yourselves in the end. And Harry did. Well, I saw the doe first, obviously. You saw the what? Said Hermione sharply. They explained what happened, and then the story of the silver doe and the sword in the pool unfolded. Hermione frowned from one to the other of them, concentrating so hard she forgot to keep her limbs locked together. But it must have been a Patronus, she said. Couldn't you see who was casting it? Didn't you see anyone? And it led you to the sword. I can't believe this. Then what happened? Ron explained how he had watched Harry jump into the pool and had waited for him to resurface. But he had realized that something was wrong, dived in, saved Harry, and returned for the sword. And he got as far as opening the locket, then hesitated, and Harry cut in. And Ron stabbed it with the sword. And it went just like that? She whispered. Well, it screamed, said Harry, with a half glance at Ron. Here. He threw the locket into her lap. Gingerly, she picked it up and examined the punctured windows. Deciding that it was at least safe to do so, Harry removed the shield charm with a wave of Hermione's wand and turned to Ron. Did you say you got away with the Snatchers with a spare wand? What? Said Ron, who had been watching Hermione examining the locket. Oh, yeah. He tugged open the buckle on his rucksack and pulled a short, dark wand out of his pocket. Here. I figured it's always handy to have a backup. You were right, said Harry, holding out his hand. Mine's broken. You're kidding, he said. But at the moment, Hermione got to her feet, and she looked apprehensive again. Hermione put the vanquished Horcrux into the beaded bag, then climbed back into her bed, settled without another word. Ron passed Harry the new wand. About the best you could hope for, I think, murmured Harry. Yeah, said Ron. Could have been worse. Remember those birds she set on me? I still haven't ruled it out, said Hermione's muffled voice from beneath the blankets, but Harry saw Ron smiling slightly as he pulled his maroon pajamas out of his rucksack. Bye, guys.